So I wanted to I just got the booster shot yesterday, so I'm a little bit flu-ish. I've been kind of taking it easy today, aching and so forth. So I'm not sure if I'll have body temperature regulation issues. I'll usually pull the jacket on and off. Um, I wanted to touch on an unusual topic just based on a rabbit hole I've been going down recently, reading about the varieties of transcendental experiences that uh, and I was reading some articles today on the resurgence of research on psychedelics as ways to address PTSD, depression, other issues. But it was interesting to see how the psychological community is thinking about that now. But it brought up a couple of there's this long-standing adjacency, shall we say, between religious experience and experience facilitated under controlled settings of religious use of drugs or whatever, including alcohol, Christian tradition, to some minor small degree, and mental health, right? That these three things, how do we maintain our mental health in general in the course of our daily lives? What is the role of religions, for example, to help us to orient ourselves and buoy our mental health? And even what is the question of people's use or lack of use of psychoactive substances, to use a formal term for them? But and then adjacent to all of that is just all the stuff we do to unwind, like Netflix, for example. It's like there's a degree of there's a large degree of sort of self-medication that we do in all of our lives to keep our mind, our heads screwed on straight, to keep life bearable and so forth. And I was talking to a friend a week or so ago, and she was saying, or just a few days ago, and she was saying that she'd had some depression during the pandemic, and that a lot of her friends, seemingly most of her friends, she said most of her friends had similar experiences, and that part of it was this disruption of the social activities that we normally rely on to have a feeling of connection, joy, to sort of take us out of our normal situations. So anyway, just wanted to reflect on all of that a little bit with the meditation class. But why don't we begin, as usual, just with some chance to settle our minds with some meditation. And again, here, this is our opportunity to detach a bit from external circumstances and just to focus internally on our body. In particular, we can take a deep breath in and out. And another breath, and just inviting ourselves to relax, sending a signal through our body, the whole of our body to settle in. And then another breath, just asking ourselves what is important right now. And we can recognize that the same nerves the same nervous system that includes our brain, all of our conscious thinking, all of our emotional responses, also connects down through our body. We have only one nervous system, even though we may feel like just thinkers a lot of the time. We may feel like we're up in our head a lot of the time. We have one nervous system connects to our breathing, connects to our heart, connects to our digestion, connects through every millimeter of our skin. And our nervous system in general can either be getting more activated, alert, aware, attentive, stressed, or it can be relaxing, decompressing. So we allow ourselves to shift into that relaxation mode. Just continue taking some deep breaths, feeling throughout our skin, muscles unclench, our skin sensations perhaps changing, perhaps some feeling of tingling, warmth, or coolness, or relaxation. Our ability to make good decisions depends on our ability to think clearly. This depends on our ability to control our attention, and also to control our emotions in the sense of avoiding extremes of attachment, craving, aversion, anger. We spend a little time focusing on our breathing, bringing our mind into a neutral state. And then we can imagine that we're in a beautiful, peaceful, uplifting environment. And then as we breathe in, we just imagine ourselves breathing in bright white light, which fills our body, uplifting our mind. And as we breathe out, imagining breathing out any negativity or disturbance in the form of black smoke. Breathing in bright white light, breathing out black smoke. All of our disturbed minds, negativities, guilt, shame, pain, all in the form of black smoke. Continue breathing in this way. We'll breathe this white light deep down into our heart, feeling like it is illuminating inside of us, just like turning on a light switch. Instantly and effortlessly dispelling our unknowing confusion. And as we breathe out, imagining this, breathing out this black smoke residue of any unknowing confusion, disturbed states of mind, all in the form of black smoke. And we imagine that all around us are those who have brought us to this place right now. Our parents, friends, family, colleagues, neighbors, everyone who's influenced us. We imagine them all happy, peaceful, smiling, and delighted to be engaging in meditation along with us. We feel a sense of closeness, that we are sharing this inner experience of peace with all of these people. No sense of gap, instead a feeling of connection. We're all united in this experience of inner peace. And generate a feeling of gratitude, recognizing that it is because of the influence of these people that we are here now. Develop the wish to repay their kindness. at the last minute, we just make a decision to try to listen carefully, take the teachings to heart, and deepen our own wisdom, compassion, mental strength for the benefit of others, to increase our capacity to help. We can open our eyes and arise from meditation. So Ashley's cousin is a resident in medical school in Baltimore, and just recently posted an article I read today earlier in the Baltimore Sun, talking about how it's okay to be angry, that we're still in the pandemic and it's completely overwhelming. We need to accept that disappointment and that emotional state. But he was also just cataloging, the variety of challenges and suffering that people had faced. And one of the points that he linked to in this article was just about the rates of depression. That I don't recall the statistic, but substantially increased rates of depression during the pandemic. It was for kids aged 12 to 18. It was in Iceland, this specific study, but I think it's as a representative sample of not just kids, but everybody, increase in depression, anxiety. These kids had a decrease in substance use during the pandemic, presumably because they weren't getting together. There was no peer pressures, less smoking, less alcohol, and so forth, but greater psychological difficulties. And, another article I'd read recently was that the rates of depression in psychiatric wards had been increased by about 50% during the pandemic. So I'm not trying to depress you with these statistics. And then I went briefly down this rabbit hole today, looking at this sort of resurgence just over the last few years of research in psychedelics. And it's come up as a topic on a number of podcasts that I've listened to, and then I read the articles recently. There was a huge wave of research in the 60s, the 50s and 60s, and then it all got promptly banned. And it was also, there were abuses of the research and it got promptly banned and went underground for a very long time. It's regularly surfaced just in the last few years. One of the main use cases that they'd introduced was treatment of intractable depression. So people who had been in therapy for many years and tried antidepressants, and basically none of this was working for them. And so they were very carefully being led into these psychedelic experiences using psilocybin, magic mushrooms, the chemical equivalent, and given therapy as a way to come through that, and having 70% of the people 4 weeks later had reduced depression, and 50% of them had dramatically reduced depression. And one of the things it linked to in this was a formal psychological scale called the 5-dimensional assessment of altered states of consciousness. So like a formal survey you could take to like, tell me about your altered state of consciousness that you experienced in this. And one of the main things that they asked about in this altered state of consciousness survey was an experience, uh, what they called an oceanic experience, a blissful oceanic experience. The idea of basically that sense of self being dissolved into an experience of universal connection, erasing the boundaries between self and others, also, in some cases, erasing the boundaries between self and inanimate objects, self and plants, self and music. Just like that normal boundary that's there, self and other, it just dissolved. And this oceanic experience described just indicating that it was endless and totally immersive. So people feeling like their mind had turned into an ocean in the sense of bottomless and boundless, but also quiet and peaceful and characterized by a blissful experience. And these researchers attributed the lifting of the depression largely to that experience, just tasting that level of connection with others. And then also to being able to reframe some of the stories that they were telling themselves in the light of that new experience. And so describing this tendency to have very negative self-talk, like stories about guilt or about fear or about this or that, that really were not serving these people. And this experience just allowing them to unwind. And a lot of the original research in psychedelics was described it as de-patterning, like reducing some of the existing structures and patterns that we live with, we think with, deconstructing that a little bit and allowing people to reconstruct it in slightly different ways. So I thought all that was interesting. there's your brief summary version, but especially this idea of isolation versus connection, and the sense in which that we find that nourishing, right? And if we think about what are the things that people haven't been able to do during the pandemic, well, a lot of it's getting together with people in person, right? And some people, go out to bars, for example, on a regular basis, or they get together with their friends, or they go to concerts and stuff. And in all of these experiences, being together with a massive group of people, you can have these really extraordinary experiences. And I don't know that we have a really great familiarity with talking about these. It's more like we come away with saying, oh, that was a great time, right? Or, oh, that game was great. Or, oh, that concert was wonderful. Or I love that music and so forth. But at least my my experience with these like very moving, like when you have an opportunity to really relax around other people, to feel connected with them, there is this blurring of this difference and distance between self and others. There's a trust, there's an openness, there's an ability to share ideas and experiences. I was writing about that a little bit and describing, using the word that came to mind was communion, a communion with others through any of these kinds of experiences. And then I looked up the definition of communion, and it was, aside from Christian ritual definition, the Oxford English Dictionary said it was an experience of expressing or sharing intimate thoughts or experiences, especially spiritual or mental experiences. I thought that was a really nice definition. I like that a lot. So the experience of expressing or sharing intimate thoughts and experiences, especially in a spiritual or mental context. And it made me think of the sense of connection where you can actually share a thought or an experience. It's an interesting thing, right? To share a thought or experience. An intimate experience of sharing, thoughts and experiences. So normally when we use the term intimate, it has a sort of sexual connotation. And one of the things, of course, that people do when they go to bars and concerts, sometimes they find a partner, a couple, and they go home with somebody. Whatever, you're supposed to stop doing that at some point along the way, but this indicating this craving of intimacy, craving of closeness and connections, of sexual relations and so forth, have that vulnerability where we, you undress, and then all of them, the not so attractive bits, sort of, overweight this and that, and discolored this and that. And so, like, there's an exposure and a vulnerability and a connection, and then shared enjoyment, and so people can have. But sometimes even with our partners, we don't always feel comfortable sharing our innermost thoughts and experiences. The things that have really moved us deeply, like internal feelings, you can still feel quite isolated. And this idea of intimacy around thoughts and experiences, especially mental or spiritual thoughts and experiences, is I found really, really interesting. And one of the things that I keep noticing is I come to these realizations that I find to be very profound. And when I speak them, there's a great risk they just sound totally like normal and utterly unextraordinary to the people that I'm expressing them with. There's three possibilities. If I have some profound realization and I want to share it with you, there's three possibilities. One, what I'm hoping for is that you get super excited about that also. You're like, that's the perfect way of explaining and expressing that. That's great. And we have the shared enjoyment about that realization. I know that feeling. I get it. I love it. That's right. But that's best case scenario. There's two other possibilities. One other possibility is that I just state the obvious, and you're left thinking, so? And it's utterly uninspiring for you and makes me think, that experience that I thought was precious is kind of cheapened a little bit. So because there's that risk, I might hold it to myself. I don't want to share my deepest insights or realizations if you're going to not care about them. So like there's a sort of holding it inwards. And the other possibility is that I share something and you just don't get it, and it just doesn't make any sense at all. And one thing that can happen in that case is, instead of feeling uncomfortable, like, wow, I must be inadequate if I can't understand that, sometimes people will react by thinking, oh well, I must be an idiot, right? This person who's saying this must be like, and rejecting the person who's sharing this. I don't know if I've made that clear. So you share something, maybe people get excited about it, or they don't care about it, or they reject it and you. And so I think that creates this tendency to kind of be cautious about how and with whom and in what circumstances we reveal these sort of deepest, most intimate experiences. But when there is an opportunity to share on that level, there's a kind of a communion. And communion literally meaning, I didn't actually read on to the etymology, but I'll look at it afterwards. But I'm assuming it's something about commonality and union, and I'll look it up and get more articulate. But it's a sharing or a communal unification where we're sharing and uniting around particular thoughts. Because in a sense, that's all we are. It's like, if you think about your house, the place where you live, there's a boundary, right? The boundary is, this is my property, this is my house. And in that space of your house, there's maybe a building or apartment or something, and there's a bunch of stuff, maybe some people. But the building and the stuff and the people and so forth, none of that really belongs to that parcel of land, right? It's just sectioned off and we call it ours. Like we say, this belongs to me and I've got a door that locks and so forth. But the same holds true with our physical parts. All the parts of our body are just, assembled from, food and water and air that we've taken in, and excrete wastes, and there's this flow in and out of our bodies. Our bodies constantly changing, but also flow in and out of our thoughts. And so there's a constant flow of ideas and experiences in and out, forgetting some, gaining others. And so this idea that the self has a real solid boundary is misleading. The self has a real solid boundary in the same way that your property has a real solid boundary, in the sense that squirrels don't respect that property line. Insects don't respect the property line. Air doesn't respect that property line. It's a creation, right? And so every time we're relaxing that boundary between self and others, whether it's just sharing a meal with people, which is arguably one of the most skillful things you can do to build relationships. There's a saying in the IT community that if you're really struggling with somebody in a different department, take them out to lunch and just eat with the same person. There's something very primordial about that ritual of eating together, where it creates some bonding, or can, not guaranteed, but so eating together or having a shared experience, and in many of these shared experiences, people do turn to alcohol or other drugs or whatever, partly just to enter this altered state of consciousness, to relax those boundaries, to relax that anxiety, that tension, to make it easier to connect with other people. But in all of this, and then back to this original research on psychedelic experiences, at some point, all of those boundaries just kind of melt away, and you realize, oh, it's just a layering of concepts, right? It's just a layering of conceptions. I've built up this sense of self, and I feel very different from everybody else. But both self and others are just some very superficial conceptual processing in this very limited part of our brain that tells stories, the storytelling part of our brain. I've mentioned in the past about the stuff that I've read, that, of course, as a tech person, I sort of glom onto this. The brain can process 11 million bytes of information per second, 10 million bytes per second. If that is visual information, 1 million bytes per second, other sensory information. And our ability to do conscious processing is only about 40 bytes per second, which I've described in previous classes as pathetic. As computers go, it's incredibly useful for human beings, but it's pretty limited. But all of the stories that we tell about who we are and how we fit in, and do people like us, and what's going to happen to us, and are we good, are we bad, whatever, all of those stories are done in that 40 bytes of processing, right? With these very repetitive threads about who we think we are, what we think we're like, and do we think people like us, and do we fit in, and so forth. And then just turning the volume down on that part of the brain a bit, mixing things up, changing our environment, changing our situation, allows us to more easily get some experience of connection, depattern our brain, so to speak, to feel, to come potentially to new insights, and to feel the sense of connectedness to others. There's but understanding that in one sense, all of these are just techniques that people are using, religious experiences or psychoactive substances or working together or exercising. All of these are techniques to bring about an experience that is the alleviation of our psychic loneliness, so to speak, this alleviation of isolation, loneliness. Um, but if you don't have those coping mechanisms, but if you don't have those, if you're not able to do the things you normally do to rely on that, including like Netflix, where you just get sucked up in a story, somebody else's story and drama. If you don't, fortunately, Netflix has preserved mental health of a large portion of the population to some degree. I don't know, debatably, but it's at least given us something to do. But if you don't have the ability to do that, the pain builds up, right? Tension builds up, that sense of isolation builds up, that question whether we fit in or not builds up. So none of these things are guaranteed to be successful. People need to be skillful and cautious, but it helps me to think in this way to help find patterns and similarities between what it is that we're trying to do to really feel that sense of connection. And what do we do once we have a sense of connection, a feeling of connection? Well, that depends. That's a whole nother area of figuring out how to be skillful, how to work, think, communicate effectively with others. But starting from this point of commonality is an important place to start from. When you think about our ancestors living in small tribes, the most important thing for that small tribe up front was bonding. All the other stuff was quite important, but a little bit secondary. The tribe needs to experience cohesiveness, unity to some degree. Then they can do things like build buildings together, hunt together, farm together, whatever. But there's a deep part of our mind longing for this closeness of the tribe that is also the closeness of unity with a group of people, so that we can then act effectively together. Just something to for you to reflect on if it's helpful for you. So why don't we take a few minutes just to reflect on this in the last few minutes. Again, turning inwards with our meditation, but this time feeling, are we actually alone or not? Were we ever alone or not? If the influence of our parents, family, friends, society, culture, and if that influence is always with us, and in fact those same forces are influencing others, are we actually as separate as we think? When we see distinct bodies, people appearing distant in space, of course, we appear separate. If we engage just on a mental, emotional level, is it even possible for us to be alone? Whatever difficulties we're experiencing now or have experienced recently, we think of everyone else experiencing similar difficulties and feel we may not know the details, but we are in communion with these others. We are united in our fear or pain, also in our joy. And for the last minute, we can reflect that even in this brief time, we have changed our mind, activated new understandings, experiences, wishes. And all of these are an inner pathway, treading this inner pathway, deepening it, making it more comfortable, more familiar, so that we can return more and more and more easily to these lines of thinking, and gradually help everyone experience the benefits, new benefits that arise from this way of thinking. And then we can open our eyes, rise from our meditation.